So much. Hello, everyone. My name is Lorraine Persiuncula. I'm the Executive Director of the Datasphere Initiative, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Regulatory Roundtable on data sandboxes and sandboxes for data. So I encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. We really like and proud ourselves from having dynamic meetings. So we want everyone to join and participate. We'll be using different tools throughout the meetings, such as Menti, but the biggest one is really the use of the chat and reacting to what others are presenting or discussing. So we really encourage you to start by introducing yourselves there. As you might have noticed, this event is being recorded, and we will make the recording available on the YouTube channel. So this is a public event. For those of you who are not familiar with the work that we do in the Datasphere Initiative, and next slide, please. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to global collaboration on the technical and policy solutions to the multidimensional and cross-border challenges of data governance. And to put it in one phrase that really captures word by word what we do, our mission is to build agile frameworks to responsibly unlock the value of data for all. And in that mission statement, every single little word there matters in terms of fostering those agile frameworks, but also striking a balance between unlocking the value of data, doing it responsibly, finding that sweet spot between the two, and also making sure that we're doing it for everyone and not leaving anyone behind. And we do this through a number of different activities. We connect and amplify voices from stakeholders from across sectors and across the world. We conduct research and capacity building on concrete data challenges and opportunities, and we experiment with policy and technical data sharing solutions, and while also working with decision makers, such as the ones here in our roundtable, so that they can enact change in data governance narratives, policies, and strategies. Here we are organizing the first roundtable as part of the Datasphere Initiative's Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data. It's a project that was made possible thanks to the generous grant for the Hewlett and Flora Hewlett Foundation. The Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data seeks to convene leaders in government, industry, academia, civil society, and the technical community to harness local perspectives to create trusted solutions really in this space to address cross-border challenges on different sectors such as health, finance, AI across the continent. And the goal of the forum is really to spur greater economic and social integration towards an African single digital market, which is something that we will discuss further in this roundtable. And next year, we will be launching the Global Sandboxes Forum with the objective to showcase the lessons and developments from the Africa Forum and position the continent also as a leader and a standard setter in digital governance. And we'll be posting more links for more information where you can learn more about the Africa Sandboxes Forum and the Global Sandboxes Forum as well. So now we are talking a lot about sandboxes. What are these? And when we are working on the foundational piece of this work, which is a report around sandboxes and its potential for cross-border solutions for data challenges, we found at least two different dimensions of what sandboxes could be. Both the notion of regulatory sandboxes, which is the traditional way of seeing sandboxes through the regulatory perspective, but also the notion of operational sandboxes, which is that space where you test out technologies as well against a selection of data or pool of data, which is there where you can actually improve that solution. And what we found out also is that there's an emergence of hybrid models of sandboxes that are taking the good practices and characteristics of regulatory sandboxes together with the operational sandboxes as well. And so the definition that we use and that we've been using since is that sandboxes are, after all, a collaborative environment that tests innovative technologies and data practices against regulatory frameworks, or that experiment with new uses, capabilities, and means of governing data. Because we see that in a lot of those instances, we need not only to test out certain solutions against regulatory frameworks, but also test it against different technological approaches as well. So looking from sandboxes through this more generous and more hybrid angle was also useful in order to expand our comprehension in terms of how we could build more agile frameworks that really bridge the world of policy and technology together. And so sandboxes are really a space where stakeholders, industry experts, technologists, academics, civil society groups, and all sorts of people can provide input into those spaces and ensure that the outputs really resonate across a comprehensive audience and reflect a broader understanding and experimentation in a given sector. And in these dialogues that we're hosting here today, we will talk about how to make sure that we are bridging stakeholder participation with regulatory frameworks and technologies. And Sandboxes really gives us the opportunity to manifest this approach by design. We are hosting this roundtable here today to leverage the collective expertise of the vast community of African policymakers and regulators towards data governance solutions. These mostly online events will be a series of dialogues and workshops that we will have designed to help you identify shared present and future regulatory challenges posed by technological advancement, but also to brainstorm around the key needs, resources, and modifications to current tools and frameworks necessary to govern societies that are going through an intense data transformation. And also to consider the role of sandboxes in making the regulatory process more responsive and making policymakers more informed. So the roundtables will address a number of topics and themes that are pertinent to African policymakers and regulators, and they include how to pick the right external partner, what are the different best practices for sandboxes design and administration, both from a regulatory perspective and operational, how to use sandboxes to develop national AI strategies, the role of cross-border sandboxes as well in terms of fostering bilateral regional coordination and interoperability, policy coordination and implementation towards realizing the Malabo Convention and the African Union Data Policy Framework, and also bringing African priorities in technology regulation into the global agenda. In this first part of this session, we'll have a roundtable to share examples of regulatory challenges related to data. At the end of the first part, we will open the floor to participants, so you can also participate in discussion, sharing your own examples and experiences. In the second part of our roundtable, we'll host presentations to share knowledge and resources on what sandboxes are, as well as case studies on how they can be helpful to understand and address data policy challenges. And the aim of this series of roundtables really is to collect regulatory issues that could be addressed by sandboxes, and also identify examples of current sandboxes experiences in Africa so that we can learn from them. And really, this is a space for sharing. That's why we call it a roundtable. We want to really surface the different examples and experiences in the continent and really make sure that we are building that space where we are building a group and a collective of practitioners that have experiences with sandboxes or are interested in exploring this further as a tool. And it's a pleasure. So thank you so much. With this, I'd like to hand over the virtual stage to my colleague, Justin Bryant, who is going to moderate this first session.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. And hello, everybody. My name is Justin Bryant, and I lead the Datasphere Initiative's Global Sandboxes Forum, of which the Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data is our seminal piece. And I just want to kind of follow up on a bit of what Lorraine said in terms of this regulatory roundtable space being a community of practice for this community that is interested in sandboxes, right? And today is the first ever. So thanks for being here. We're going to have many others of these, which will be open to other topics on sandboxes. And we're doing a lot of talking this time around, but we really want to give the stage to the community. And so with that, we will go into our first panel, focusing on data-related policy priorities and how sandboxes can play a role in addressing these challenges. So I want to introduce our three speakers. Colin Mashile, who's the Chief Director at the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies for South Africa. Stephen Mutiso, who leads the renal program for the Ministry of Health in Kenya. And Rachel Magege, who's a lawyer and projects associate at Policy, focusing on feminist movement building. And so the first question I'm going to direct at Colin, and Stephen can also chime in on this question. But basically, what data-related policy questions and issues are you focusing on right now in the Communications and Digital Technologies Department of the South African government, Colin? Yeah, how are you addressing those currently?
Good afternoon to everyone. Because I'm using my phone, if you can allow me to switch off the camera. So in terms of the data-related policy questions, you'll know that in South Africa, we are in the 5th generation regulatory policy mode, where we collaborate with the industry, academia, and all the sectors affected by the digital communication sector. So what we have done now is that after COVID and during COVID, we realized that there was a need for reforms in the digital communication sector, where we have to reduce cost and improve the quality of communications, also increase investment and expansion of the technology so that there's growth. So what we did is that we engaged with the industry. The presidency led what was called Operation Vulindlela, where they said we needed to deal with the rollout of digital infrastructure, and we started developing bylaws and rapid deployment guidelines. In terms of 5G and next generation spectrum, what we did was that we had to develop frameworks so that the operators started to operate in a new environment, and that involved us engaging with them, because we face, and the sector was facing a very serious challenge of electricity. What happened is that there was a policy direction that we did alongside with ICASA, where we said they needed to grant some exemptions to the sector, especially during load shedding, because the digital infrastructure was very critical in terms of communications and other issues to ensure that the economy runs. So we have identified a few areas that need to be dealt with via regulatory sandboxes, with an understanding that it's a collaborative effort. The sector has data, we have data, we need to share. And then we also have to protect the South African citizens so that they participate in the digital economy that we are trying to build. So that's what, those are the key priority areas that we did that I can think of. We are also now developing an AI policy where we have collaborated with universities, and they are starting to develop areas where they are strong in. But at the end of the day, we are going to use some of the things to develop policy frameworks in terms of how South Africa and our region should be responding to the developments around AI in a human development way. Yeah, I thought I should just mention those.
Thank you very much, Colin. And if I can follow up from what I heard from your response, basically, you have a couple areas where you're looking to develop regulatory sandboxes right now. And I guess it'd be great to know if those sandboxes already have kind of a focus and a mandate that the group could hear about. And then another thing I heard from you was the need for digital infrastructure. And, you know, there's a lot of discussions around digital public infrastructure these days. And we know that Sandboxes can play a role in bringing about that digital public infrastructure. And so I'd love to hear from you as well about maybe how you envision these experimental processes and Sandboxes helping to create the digital public infrastructure that's needed to resolve those challenges in South Africa.
The one that had come from the presidency, it was very easier because when they developed it, everyone was involved. But you know that we are operating within an electronic communications or a telecoms, a broadcasting and a postal sector that requires certain regulatory frameworks to happen. So I think in line with international trends, what usually has to happen is that for you to have formal regulatory sandboxes, you'll need to have an engagement with the sector and also public engagement. With infrastructure, we are focusing on South African Connect to say how do we roll out broadband into rural areas and other issues. So I think maybe as part of the issue that one was going to raise is that the next step and the challenge is that what you need to do is to come up with a framework that everyone knows that this is the framework operating. But because we had to respond at that point and there was no larger framework, I think in the next year or two, we will be saying this is the kind of a regulatory sandbox that we agreed to with. Remember, most of them have to be placed at the regulatory level. So we have to agree with the regulators, and our regulators are spanning across the Competition Commission and other regulators and other ministries that are critical to the environment. So you will require to have a framework that everyone will know to say, in terms of this infrastructure, by 2025, you have to do it within 12 to 18 months or something, or to 24 months, so that because they're not supposed to be long term. And from the experience and the lessons that you learn, that's when probably you say, here we don't need this regulation, here we need to update it so that it's. So what we are grappling with is to say, how do you go to a stage where you formalize it and it becomes ingrained within the policy framework like it was within the financial sector. So it's something that I think we will be working on, because for now, you do not have that framework that like you'll have for regulatory impact assessment, or what we call socio-economic impact analysis. You also need a framework that everyone will use, not only within the communications, but within health, within transport, within home affairs and others, so that we all operate from the same framework and we know how we collaborate. But they are largely they'll have to be led by regulators, but you need a sort of a policy framework that will guide everyone around it. So for now, we are still trying to, it's at an early stage, and we are still trying to think around it so that it's formulated in a proper way.
Thank you very much, Colin. Steve, I'm going to switch over to you. I'd love to hear, I mean, you and I have spoken extensively, but I'd love for the group to hear about the data policy related challenges that you face in the Ministry of Health in Kenya, and the role of experimentation in resolving some of these challenges, and where you see the Ministry of Health going.
Yeah, thank you very much, Justin, and good evening to everyone, for those who have it as evening. And my name is Stephen Mutiso. I work for the Ministry of Health, and I coordinate renal programming, as well as dabbling quite a bit into the digital health space. So it's a little bit of a lateral shift from maybe the common spaces. So the sandbox environment in health is actually quite an interesting space. So we are not generally set up to work in this kind of digital space right from the initial building blocks of the health system. However, we do have components that sort of overarch and lean into different sectors. So for instance, we've had in 1998 an ICT Act that governs communication and information, and that was reviewed in the year 2018. And in the year 2019, we did have a Data Protection Act passed in the parliament in Kenya. And as recently as October of this year, we actually had an omnibus of 4 health bills, the most prominent of these being the Digital Health Bill. So there has been a long period of legislation and regulation, but not directly touching on health, which creates quite a bit of a gray area when we start looking at what to do with health data. And maybe just to give some examples of situations where I think I have interacted with possible spaces in which a sandbox would have been quite an effective thing. So at some point in my young practicing life, I worked in a facility on the border between Kenya and Tanzania, and sometimes would ship patients back and forth for pretty much the same conditions, obstetric emergencies, road traffic crashes, and so on and so forth. But we'd have very different sets of rules that would make patient care extremely difficult, and at some point actually rather chaotic because of just different protocols. So of course, at this point in time, I had never heard of a sandbox, so I wouldn't have imagined that there would be a conversation I would join at some point that would probably look into resolving some of these issues. And I mean, we work quite a bit in the cross-border health forum with other East African nations. And I remember in 2015 sitting in a task force where we were doing a tabletop exercise and trying to build scenarios around at the point in time there was this Ebola pandemic in parts of West Africa, and we were trying to sort of see like how would we build systems in place to detect patients, to pick them up early, to be able to refer them across the East Africa region. And that for me also sat quite interestingly very recently as another opportunity for possible sandboxes to be used to sort of create regulations where we can share data, we can share protocols. So still very new in the field. We felt that the legislation tends to be rather restrictive when we look at it from a health perspective. The Data Protection Act itself almost creates a massive siloed environment for health data within the country, yet we want to have sort of a portability index that we can refer to. There are revisions to the same, and we actually borrow quite a bit from the trade space. This seems to be something that works really well. I don't know if some of us on the call have interacted with the one-stop border posts in across different points in Kenya, and those actually are very interesting regulatory sandbox that has operational sort of components to it. So I still feel like we are quite optimistic, and going forward, I really look to developing in this space. And maybe just to mention that within the country, we have a massive digital transformation shift. So a lot of government services are switching to digital. We have a lot of infrastructure coming in. And because this is primarily in the ICT ministry, it's very interesting how we are trying to borrow and link and sort of plug ourselves into these digital superhighways that are being built around us. And yeah, it remains an interesting space. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Steve. That was very illustrative. And if I can tease out some of the themes that I heard from what you said, right, there's a need for cross-border engagement where countries that might be right next to each other sharing border zones, right, have to be subject to different policies for patients and others in very similar situations. And that creates friction and complication where there might not need to be. And then also in Kenya and a lot of other countries across Africa, there's a lot of digital infrastructure being promulgated and built, but experimentation is kind of needed to understand where that can link properly to the needs of citizens and where that can create the proper interventions across the board. So thank you very much, Steve. That was very, very insightful. I want to turn it now over to Rachel Magege from Policy to share a bit of their findings from the Afrofeminist Data Governance Project. And Rachel has a set of slides that she will also be sharing here. So over to you, Rachel.
Justin, thank you so much, and my sincere gratitude to my fellow speakers on this panel. I will use very few minutes just to show a little bit of what we found in our research project this year, termed the Afro-Feminist Data Governance Projects. And Natalia, if you can switch on to the next slide, this just gives a little bit of the highlights. We specifically wanted to look at the experiences of African women when it comes to data governance. So we understand with regulation, with policies, a lot of them tend to be very general, and that's very understandable because what we found is it is not always easy to mention every single person in an act, in as much as we'd want to see, the word girl, people with disabilities, tribal person, this and that. So we find that a lot of these laws tend to encompass all the different people. And so in our case studies in Kenya, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Zambia as phase one, talking to the different stakeholders a lot, we saw that a lot of the times the feminist principle, the African principle tends to be missing from these different regulations and from these frameworks, just because our frameworks have borrowed a lot from a lot of the Western ideas of data governance. And then if we can move on to the next slide, Natalia, I wanted to show you some key things and some recommendations that we propose. So we need to be very deliberate when it comes to implementation. Something that we heard a lot from one of our very key stakeholders was that being creative in how you implement your Data Protection Act, your Health Act, Finance, your Elections Act, your Education Act, being very deliberate and creative will reduce the chances of you being or of the regulators or the states just only catering to the needs of certain people and missing out other people. Meaning that if you have a law, if you have a framework that says everyone should have access to information, you as the regulators, as the key actors, being creative and saying that I'm going to make sure that this law is able to accommodate people who speak different languages, people who have different bodily needs, people who have different gender needs, and this and that. So you find yourself that you have complied with the law, you find yourself that you have met the needs of everyone in as much as you can, and it also limits the chances of complaints or maybe just certain claims that you have missed out on certain people. So those were our recommendations. We also were highly encouraged to make sure that in our different discussions on data governance, on implementation, on even the sandboxes that we're talking about, Justin, and I know we've talked about this a lot, we have to make sure that we are looking into the often, if I may say, forgotten areas of implementation. So this is with taxes, intellectual property, copyrights, and we found something really interesting in Ivory Coast, where we were told that one of their biggest products is cassava. And so what we find is a lot of women would grow these crops and then package them well, but when they go out there, because of the regulators and the systems that are in charge of that, they would end up being said made in Burkina Faso, whereas they have actually been made in Ivory Coast. So something in the middle there was missing, that where is the rights of these women, their intellectual property rights in making cassava, and why is it going out there saying that it was made in Burkina Faso? What advantage does Burkina Faso have with this other country that the product is going to? So all of these different areas are very instrumental in how we look at data governance, and especially how we look at implementation and how to practice the regulation of all of them. And so we said, and we looked at the different Afro-feminist principles that have come out in our studies, especially inclusivity, accessibility, consent, governance and trust, and even privacy. I welcome you all to, Natalia, if you can go to our very last slide. We have some suggested readings, and then to the very last slide, Natalia, I'm happy to share this with you. If you visit our website, policy.org, we are going to be showcasing and displaying more of our findings in a much more comprehensive way. So we invite you to follow our social media pages, our websites, and I'm happy to keep this conversation and to answer any questions that anyone might have. So I believe it's very instrumental. We are very confident and very happy about the work we've done, because this is work being done by us as Africans for Africans. It brings a very realistic touch to it. It brings a very down-to-earth conversation when we talk about these things, and people can actually tell us that my data, when I'm making a fruit or a cash crop in cassava, is being lost somewhere and turning out to be something else, just because maybe the people per se in charge are not protecting this data that I have. So thank you all very much for listening to my very brief analysis. And Justin, I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Really appreciated your presentation. And it's important to remember that in any digital intervention that we're making, we have to think about the marginalized folks. We have to think about empowering women through these efforts and ensuring that that they're inclusive and that the leadership of these efforts takes them into account. So thank you very much, Rachel. At this point, I want to open up the floor for questions to any of the three panelists. There was a lot that was said by all three of them, and I'm sure that this group might want to probe some of that deeper. So the floor is yours.
Hi, Justin. I'm not sure what the process is if I have to raise up my hand. My name is Kate. Just a quick question to, I think, Steve from Kenya. You made a good point about how the data protection acts tend to be siloed. I'd like to hear from the other panelists or even you as the moderator what the experiences are. Is this a case of the data protection acts and offices running independently, or there not being very deliberate efforts to interlink with other regulatory institutions, you know, like in finance or in health? And is there an opportunity there to have some kind of direct or intentional collaboration? Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. I'll let Steve, if you want to go ahead and answer that, since that was directed at you, and then the rest of us might be able to chime in. Or Rachel, if you're ready to go, just go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Justin, and thank you, Kate, for the wonderful question. I'm happy to answer this because one of our target countries was Kenya as well when we did look at the Data Protection Act. So with this, again, I will come back to the same song I sing. It comes to the implementation of it. So the Act establishes a Data Protection Authority, or we sometimes call them a Data Protection Commission. And of course, they are in charge of all things data, registration of data processors, and penalties if people do not abide by the law. So I think in that, a lot of times the system or the implementation has been maybe just very congested into one area. You know, if it's people doing data, if it's people doing research, if it's people doing this certain components, if it's matters of consent, matters of privacy. And so that needs to branch out more. And this is what our stakeholder, one of our stakeholders from Kenya, a very wonderful advocate of the High Court of Kenya, told us that with data, we have to expand our conversation into so many other areas: family, taxes, investment, because all of these things in one way or another are touching on data. And so this is a responsibility of the authorities as well. If it's the Data Protection Commission, if it's the Ministry of Information and Communications Technology, to look into which other areas and which other components of society, of the laws, are touching on data and how to merge with them together. Now, the work of the Data Protection Authority is usually very, very hard, because you'll find in a country you have this one Data Protection Authority that has to manage all things data in the entire country. So that in itself, again, is a lot of work. And maybe that's even, I don't know, that's even why you find that maybe they limit themselves to only the data, digital research, and not into all these other areas that people do not think about, you know, health, family, marriage, taxes, investments, education, and all of these other components. Happy to talk about this with you more, Kate. Thank you, Justin.
Colin, please.
So with us, as we try to deal with the online content matters that will affect children and other issues, you find that because we have a data protector that works in justice. So what the regulators have done, which is, I think, that collaborative effort that we've been talking about, you'll find that they're like in line with international trend, they're forming what is called a Digital Regulators Forum, where data issues that are related to children that will affect a sector-specific regulator and a competition regulator dealt with, so that you do not have operators and others getting confused or doing what we call regulatory forum shopping, so that they share the data in terms of experience, what they are finding out, and how to address matters that should be unlocked for the benefit of the public and the sector in general. So the collaboration between regulators is an emerging trend that you see even global, where Ofcom and others will be collaborating with their data protection agencies, so that the sector is regulated properly, because the digital platforms and the digital sector is starting to be cross-cutting across all the sectors. So I thought I should raise that.
Thank you, Colin. Any other questions? Well, Colin, did you want to say something else? Oh, Rob?
Thank you very much. I have a question to Colin regarding South Africa's experience.
Rob, we're having trouble. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you, but I think you started to get a little better. So could you repeat what you were saying?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is good.
My question is to Colin, who noted that South Africa is in the early stages of thinking through sandbox exercises, and just wondering what resources are you and your team looking at to inform how to design sandboxes in this area? I think it's something that probably all of us are trying to address, and of course, Datasphere is making a huge contribution to that. But just wondering if there's other resources that you're using and whether you could share.
I think the thinking is that when you start doing regulatory sandboxes, what you do is you start acknowledging what you have as a policymaker and a regulator in terms of data and other issues. Then you start to realize that the academics will have their own data, the industry will have their own data. So because you need to socialize it even for the public, that's why the approach that you decide, it becomes a collaborative thing that you agree to with the sector. You also, for the sake of those that might not have been part of the discussions, you publish it for comment so that everyone comments around it and enhances it, because the intention is not to do it for the sake of regulation, but is to encourage innovation in the sector and encourage other developmental or developments in the sector. So what we will usually do is that you know that regulators are very important. You know that the sector, the regulated sector, is very important, and all other government departments. So for you to gather all this data, you also have to do your own research and analysis of the sector that is forward-looking, that you do for the next few years, to say what kind of a digital regulator you want or what kind of regulations will operate. Then from that gathering of data and information, then you'll know that when I develop data and cloud policy, I'll need competition authorities, hyperscalers, and everyone to come and discuss with me. So that will be the approach I would recommend.
Thank you, Colin. At this point, I want to transition to the next section of our program here. So we want to collect some data from each of you, not personal data or anything like that. Don't worry about that. Just some answers to some questions related to the data governance issues that we're all focused on. So we have a tool called Menti, in which we've made a short survey with some questions that I think would be very illustrative if the group could answer them, and we can see where we all stand on some of these topics. So you can go ahead and use your mobile devices to scan this QR code, or you can go to the URL that has just been posted in the chat. And we're going to give you each a few minutes to answer these questions, and then take a minute to discuss the answers and see what that might say.
Are we ready to come back?
I think they're going to need a little more time. Is that right, Natalia?
I think we have received a good amount of answers, so if you want, we can share the results.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, interesting. So the first question was, do you agree or disagree with the following statements? And this was on a scale of 0 to 4. So it's interesting to kind of see where we stand here. So digital regulation in Africa is moving in the right direction and addressing the right issues. And these are still changing as we continue to get more responses. Right now, the group sits around at 2.4, which means that generally we feel like it's moving in the right direction and addressing the right issues. We're not very confident in that. Digital regulation is reaching African countries too slowly. That's interesting. That's our strongest response at 2.7. Seems like most people want more digital regulation to come to African countries. Okay. And the third question, the regional economic communities are doing enough to facilitate accelerated regional integration. Generally, we're more in disagreement about this. We think that they should be doing a bit more. And there is inherently a trade-off between focusing on domestic versus continental data efforts. Looks like that one, people do agree that there is a trade-off between that, more or less. It would be interesting to know what people feel like is more important. Let's go to the next. Well, actually, before we move on from this, does anybody have any thoughts on these questions in particular? Did anybody was anybody struck by these issues or have any comments they wanted to make? I know for me, I can start on this one. I'm interested in the second question, in terms of digital regulation reaching the African countries too slowly. There's a dialogue out there basically that says that the market for technology across the African countries is not developed enough to warrant the level of regulation being contemplated at this stage, and that possibly there needs to be a greater focus on market development, whereas there's a considerable focus on regulation, and you don't want regulation to outpace development and constrain development that hasn't happened yet. So there are people who do believe that there's too much regulation already, and they need to let the market develop more and let regulation come in after we've seen some more development. So that's interesting that this group maybe doesn't feel that way. Anybody else have any thoughts? Very quiet group today. Not a whole lot of
I'll chime in here, Justin.
There we go, Kate. Thank you.
That's a really good point. I kind of agree with it and then also disagree with it in parts, in the sense that we have seen this play out, particularly in more developed markets, and it's an issue that people are still grappling with on how to properly regulate. Maybe it's an issue of how strong should the regulation be? Maybe some guardrails are okay and not go too much into detail. But I do think that there's a need for people to still, for markets to still have some form of regulation to basically boost and give more credibility to, say, small businesses that are trying to, either go into fintech or some kind of digital transformation project, because this is critical for them in terms of how they pitch for money to people who live in markets where this is developed. And maybe this is just my investment hat being biased here, but I tend to see this quite a bit, that people are not familiar with certain African markets. And then if you also have an additional layer of there being no regulation, it just makes things slightly a bit complicated. But happy to hear a few more views on this.
Yeah, Rob, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects here, and I agree. It's a natural tension, right? On the one hand, We want to ensure that there's not negative impacts and hence may need regulation. On the other hand, as you pointed out, the issue around market development and innovation, not thwarting innovation. But I think there's also a fear that, if different African governments simply adopt model legislation from the European Union or from the US or whatever, it may not be completely appropriate and contextualized, and therefore, this rush to get regulation in place without being adapted to the local context, I think is a fear for many of us in the policy space. And as we know, once a policy is in place, it's much more difficult to change that policy, right? Regulations are written, implementation takes place, capacity is built, institutions are developed, and then it becomes very difficult to back out of policy once it's in place. So I think it's one of the challenges that we face across the continent that is complicated by so many different 54 different economies, big, small, some more connected, some less connected, some more innovative, some less innovative, et cetera.
Thank you, Rob. Excellent points. Karen, you were next, please.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Just to add to the points shared by others around just finding the right balance between regulation that's good enough and can become too much. I often feel that the incentives for governments to digitize or to take the digital transformation may not always balance with the real purpose for digitization. And here's what I mean. I feel that often governments buy into digitization from a business case, from a point of raising more revenue from citizens. And so that hunger, if I would call it, to really broaden the tax base, for example, does not balance well with the need to actually improve people's lives and to reuse those resources in a way that actually creating more efficiency and improving people's lives. So that trade-off ends up looking like regulation is becoming a bit too much, and actually citizens therefore not understanding why the regulation seems to be moving much faster than the improvement in people's lives that digital transformation promises. The other example that I also draw on for my argument is from the telemedicine sector or subsector, where you find that providers of telemedicine, often private sector, of course, getting there fast before government, really creating efficiencies in providing healthcare through telemedicine, and that regulation actually stifling that process, and private providers being required to fill too many forms, providing too much information or information that may not be really clear what government is going to do with that information. And therefore, really, as Kate was mentioning, stifling innovation and stifling, the end game, which was really to improve people's lives. That's why I believe, the direction which regulation is going in the continent, I feel might not be taking that balanced approach of efficiency versus really improving and seeing change in people's lives.
Thank you, Karen. Does anybody have any thoughts on any of the other questions here? I know we've been talking about the speed of regulation. I think Karen kind of teed up and Rob to some extent the content of the regulation, which is covered in sort of the first point, but we'd love to hear on some of the other points that we tried to cover in these 4 questions. Rachel, you can go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much, Justin, for this opportunity. I look at it in a different way. I'm actually very hopeful about what Africa is doing with data and the digital aspect. I know in comparison to other places, maybe in comparison to other parts of the world, that may look very different. And that was even my thinking with this question. Digital regulation is reaching African countries too slowly in comparison to who or to where. But if we are looking at ourselves as Africa, the things that Africa wants and the things that Africa needs in terms of economy, in terms of agriculture, in terms of where Africa is going, some things may be happening slower than the way we would want them to, but I still think there is room to congratulate Africa on some of the things that it has done. I know when I went to Ghana for this project that we did, they have a Data Protection Act from 2012. And, you know, for many African countries, a lot of the data protection acts or data protection and regulation laws, a lot of the conversations are still very new. And I'm saying this because me being from Tanzania, our act was just passed last year in 2022, but you have a country like Ghana, which already passed the Data Protection Act in 2012. So looking at how different countries prioritize what they want, and yes, let's be honest, it is about business, it is about economy, and even the different regional interactions and the different regional relationships. I still think that they're making some improvements and doing the best that they can into advancing digital revolution and digital innovation. And we are going to see a lot of other bigger things come up. We already have the regional frameworks. We have the AU Data Policy Framework, the Convention on Cybersecurity. So it's just a matter of how much more can we make all the countries together see how beneficial these policies are, because then again, each country will look at how these instruments benefit them. They will look at their own national interests first. But I still think there is room to still congratulate Africa on what it's doing. Just a brief comment I wanted to make. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I apologize. I don't think that question was made to be demonstrative in terms of suggesting that digital regulation is reaching African countries too slowly, right? It was kind of just posed to see if people agreed or disagreed with that statement. It could have easily been, is digital regulation reaching African countries too slowly, right? To kind of just open it up and see how people felt about that, but appreciate it nonetheless. I think what you mentioned at the end actually bridges us into the next question pretty well. And I think I want to go ahead and move on to that in terms of which is more important for countries to focus on in order for the African continent as a whole to advance in its digital development, right? And Rachel spoke a bit to the African Union and the continental instruments and also the domestic digital policy instruments that are being implemented. And it looks like here, 17 of us think that the continental instruments are more important, and 11 of us might agree that the domestic instruments are more important. But if we go back to the first slide, that fourth question there suggests that most of us kind of agree that there is some sort of trade-off between focusing on domestic and continental efforts, right? So to the extent that we do agree that that there is a trade-off there, seems like most of the group, if we move to the next slide again, thinks that there's more emphasis needed on the continental efforts, and that it's more important for the continent as a whole to advance. Matthew, I see you have your hand up. I'm sorry if I didn't get to you earlier. Please go ahead.
Not a problem. Thank you, Justin, and thank you for the invitation to join all of you. So you're actually getting into where I was probably going to make my comments anyway, so it all works fine. So two things. One is that we are not a regulator. We're a Department of Commerce. We don't regulate data policy. That's not our bailiwick. But one thing I think it's important. Two things I think are important. One is that from whether you're talking about commercial, academic, or whatever venues you're looking at, having a whole patchwork of different policies across a region, whether that's the Africa, whether that's the European Union, whether that's Southeast Asia, that becomes really complicated for companies to adhere to all of those different rules. Even if there's like a baseline of what economies do in terms of managing data policy or data regulation or whatever, or how they design to take a look at these questions, it's helpful to have kind of everybody at least at the same starting point. And then people can progress at different places depending upon the local market conditions, the local market needs, and the needs of the citizens in economies. If economy is too small individually, it may be a little it may not be most efficient for a company to kind of say, hey, I want to go into that market. So that's one thing. A second thing to note here is that I really like Rachel's point about the Data Protection Acts, because one thing that we really have started looking at the question of health data a bit more closely in our office over the last year and a half. And one thing we really would like to tease out from all of you is how much of this is data policy for everything, and should health data be looked at in a different way, manner, form than other forms of data? Because we know that people's health conditions are sensitive. They're very much guarded by, governments are very cautious about making sure that people don't have sensitive health information shared inappropriately or shared too widely. How do you come up with kind of, here's your data protection rules versus what are health data protection rules? And I know that the idea behind the sandbox is to kind of experiment and come up with different ways of doing things. So I think that creates a very interesting opportunity for everyone in this group to kind of think through these questions. And the final thing I'll just say real quickly is that there's a lot of opportunity for Africa to at least portray themselves as a thought leader on how to take a look at some of these questions. I don't think any economy has got the perfect mix of ingredients together on exactly how to take a look at this area, but I think that you all have a chance to have your voice be heard in terms of setting that forward. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Matthew. And great points. And you touched on something that I try to say when I convene these dialogues is that, as you said, nobody really has this figured out quite well. Not Europe, not the US. Like, everyone is still trying to iterate on this and figure out kind of what are the right solutions for data as it continues to emerge, and as we continue to discover all sorts of new attributes about how data works and how it's governed. And so this is an opportunity for players on the continent to become leaders and contribute their unique perspectives to the global conversation. You also mentioned the case of health data, which we are also involved with through our sectoral working group on health. And I tapped Kirsten from Transform Health to respond to that question as one of our resident expert health data governance practitioners. So Kirsten, if you would.
Hi, thanks, Justin. Yeah, I'd actually put up my hand because I want to speak to the other question as well. But when I heard that, great to just come in there as well. Because, yeah, it's something that we're really pushing on with Transform Health and working, just for those that you don't know, Transform Health, we're a coalition of 150 organizations committed to harnessing the potential of digital and data to accelerate UHC progress. And a big focus of our work is on strengthening health data governance, and particularly looking at regulatory aspects of that. And within that, kind of recognizing that it is an issue and an area where much more is needed across all sectors. And there is value in working across sectors in that, but then recognizing that when looking within health specifically, it brings out a lot of specific issues around health data and the sensitivities around health data, which we argue justifies specific health data governance approaches and regulations to really look at those kind of sensitivities. And they also sit within a bit of a different regulatory landscape as well, a normative landscape, given, other existing international norms, international health policies, et cetera. So yeah, we argue that while there is a lot of value in taking a cross-sectoral all-of-government approach, but there is a particular focus on need for specific regulations to address and govern health data. The other point I just want to add in terms of kind of countries going ahead or more cross-regional engagement around it. And I'm not sure one is needed at the expense of the other, but I think one thing just say that is value in kind of more of a continental approach is just in that process and countries kind of moving together. Also the element of building some of that alignment across countries as well, and consensus, and kind of learning from best practices across countries around what some of the kind of core elements and considerations would be for data governance, in particular health data governance. And just to flag that one thing that we are together with Helena, we are co-chairing one of the flagship initiatives of the Africa CDC. They have a set of a number of you probably know, a set of Africa CDC flagship initiatives to take forward the digital strategy. And one of those is specifically focused on health data governance, which has a priority around developing an African common position on health data governance, which would essentially establish a set of minimum standards or considerations for health data governance regulations, with the aim of building some of that consensus across countries of what should be in national regulations, but also to really take a bottom-up approach to learn from good practices across countries, but would also then serve as a tool and a resource for countries to strengthen their own national approaches. So kind of supports both of those processes, and also that kind of alignment across countries, which is really important for facilitating cross-border data sharing as well.
Thank you, Kirsten. Lots of great things there. I think one of the things I heard from you was that we don't necessarily have to take the domestic policy instruments at the expense of the continental or regional policy instruments, or see those things in competition with one another. But I think when I look, and obviously with this group, right, we even see the regional instruments as being maybe more important for the whole continent to advance. But I guess when I look anecdotally at the African continent, it seems like that very thing has happened, right? We have 30 plus countries that have adopted domestic digital policy instruments and data protection laws, and are beginning to really develop that capacity within country. And still, the Malabo Convention took many years to ratify, and I think it's only 16 countries that have ratified it to date, and maybe not a whole lot of engagement on the continental position even now, right? So it'd be interesting to know, given the feelings of this group, given that maybe there's not a trade-off, or maybe there is more of a trade-off than we're appreciating, why things have manifested the way they have, right? One of the commentators earlier talked about creating the business case for the country and investment in this space coming from the regulation being in country. And so maybe there's just more credible incentives for these instruments to be developed on the domestic level than the continental level, although we recognize the importance of the regional instruments. So thank you for that. Lorraine, go ahead.
I'm going to be brief and touch on the last points. And we purposely included the question on the trade-offs to provoke that conversation in terms of, is there a trade-off? And interestingly, the second slide kind of shows that at the same time, we should be focusing more on implementing a regional approach, while at the same time it's seen as a trade-off. And I understand why some people might say and strongly agree with the fact that it is a trade-off, because just human resources alone, there's only so much you can do in terms of following up with the different kind of initiatives, both at the domestic and the regional level. But I would say that it is a false trade-off if you actually include and make that connection between the priorities, the domestic ones, or the public policy objectives domestically being achieved through a regional agenda as well, which was shared by the other speakers too. In the same way as we shouldn't necessarily be framing that conversation as a trade-off from a perspective of either a general approach to data or one that is sector specific. I think there's space for both to coexist, as I think that's what Kristen was also sharing in terms of the need of a general approach for data, but also one that's specific for data. So if you actually take the approach of domestic and regional, and one kind of feeding to each other in the same way as we do for general, but all and then specific instead of an or, I think that we are going to achieve those national and regional objectives much quicker as well. But I'm just very happy with the conversation and where it's going, because I feel like we start getting to, what are our assumptions and what are we in agreement with, and what do we need to do about it in terms of creating those interconnections. Great comments in the chat as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Lorraine. Natalia, could we please proceed to the next slide? Okay. The biggest obstacle to achieving the digital single market by 2030 is envisioned in the AFCFTA. We had 29 responses. Let's see what we've got here. Couple lack of political will, more than a couple lack of political will. Let's see, slow regulation and interoperability. Let's keep going. Lack of political drivers, coordinated political will. I don't know if this person submitted the same one twice. There's another lack of political will. The way that everybody said lack of political will, it seems like that might be the same person. Maybe a couple times. I'm not entirely sure. Infrastructure, regulatory fragmentation, digital infrastructure, lack of digital infrastructure, lack of cross-border digital payment infrastructure gap. Let's go down more, Nat. Thank you. Political goodwill. We can keep going. I'm telling you. Evolution of technology. Yeah, there are some people that submitted their response a couple times, so it's hard to know what actually came up multiple times. Paucity of information, financial and technical support. Okay, financial, and that also looks like that might have been somebody who had trouble submitting their responses. So okay, a couple things that we saw then were lack of political will and lack of infrastructure, if I get that correctly. Any other themes that are popping out here? And then I think there's a regulatory theme too that goes in here. So political will seems like number one. So then the question to follow up with is why is there a lack of political will? Why is this not, something that is going to motivate politicians and decision makers to get on board? And what would? Anybody have any potential answers to that question?
Well, I'm not going to speak to the political question too much, but I put the one of the comments there, the having fora where people can converse. I think that's that's a broader question that maybe all of you in your respective economies can help with. Because one thing that is sometimes a challenge is asymmetry of data or information, if you will. So some people may know, hey, we're writing a new data protection law. We're looking to protect health data. We're taking a look at doing something, and it's not put in a public forum, public gazette, public announcement, public website somewhere. That can be a problem, because then the certain parties would know about it, but there's not consistency of everybody knowing about the particular regulation or law. So particularly if you're taking a look at something across all 54 African Union economies in something like the AFCFTA, it's important that everybody has the same information, that there's a common place that people can say, when we're taking a look at data issues, this is where you look. This is where we're preparing a particular regulation, a particular rule, a particular proposal, a particular sandbox, a particular pilot. I think just to say that there are things in that area that also this group can help elevate the importance of. Besides the focus on how do you manage data, it's also just the process of how you make information available so everybody has an equitable viewpoint on it.
Thanks, Matthew. Susan, please.
Thank you, Justin. Mine is, I think it's mostly a reflection on this lack of political will. So when you look at, and I'm going to use the top of mind analogy. So when you look at governments, when you look at how this idea of political will moves across different countries, there is usually it's usually anchored by kind of the whatever's top of mind for that government. And so in Kenya's example, we have digital transformation. And a good example as to why we're seeing a lot of these regulatory frameworks coming into place and why Kenya is one of the pioneering countries in Africa that's kind of leading the charge in terms of establishing, sandboxes, for example, regulatory sandboxes, for example, etc., is because there is an alignment between what the government is looking to do and some of these, for example, interests with regards to the Africa Free Trade Area, establishing, infrastructure, etc. And so for Kenya, there is that kind of alignment between what's top of mind and being prioritized by the government and the corresponding aspects that touch on like data sandboxes and digital transformation overall, and the relevant facets that come with it. And so in other countries, I'm assuming that there would be this kind of prioritization of either aspects or prioritization of issues. And so I think this lack of political will really is tied into what is being prioritized based on the government's interest or what the manifesto for, kind of the government of the day is. And so we are currently enjoying, quote unquote, enjoying this alignment of like digital transformation, and then it's leading to, various regulatory frameworks being enacted. And I believe one of the speakers did mention the omnibus of like 4 acts that were brought into that were bills that were enacted this year. And so for us, it's working in our favor because there is political will. But I think it really is a matter of how are the government, what's top of mind for the government, how is that prioritized? And then how does it align with, for example, the single digit market, digital transformation, and also, like the Africa Free Trade, Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. We would love to keep talking about this, but we're getting a little behind schedule at the moment. So I want to go ahead and move on to this next question about the single most important monetary investment governments can make to accelerate digital transformation in Africa. And if we take a look at what we have here, I see a couple: infrastructure and capacity building, power grids, which is infrastructure, investing in and reducing costs, sandboxes, high-speed broadband infrastructure, co-investing, infrastructure. It seems like there's a lot of infrastructure, and there's education, which is of course important. So interesting. It looks like there's a pretty broad consensus around infrastructure. For this question, I don't know if anybody wants to comment. Colin, I think I cut you off last time, so feel free to step in with your comments. And please be brief, just given that we're a little behind schedule.
Yes. No, I did not want you to live without knowing that the AU, there's currently an AFTA regulatory framework for communications sector that deals with that digital economy issues that you have raised, where countries are making inputs, and they're trying to develop a continent-wide regulatory framework for the communication sector that will deal with such issues. And countries, via their ministries of trade and industry, are making inputs. And what we have done, in the spirit of what we are talking about today, is that in terms of the inputs, as a responsible government department for electronic communication sector, we involve the industry to make their inputs in terms of how they would like to be governed across the continent. So from a South African perspective, I think the department is working well with the Department of Trade and Industry in terms of making inputs to AFTA, so that when the AU develops a continental-wide regulatory framework for the communication sector, at least the input of the industry and the regulators and the policymakers are ahead. I thought I should just mention that so that around the last question.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, now I think we're going to go into another series of presentations from some other panelists that are going to be talking about the potential sandboxes to address data policy challenges. And I will go first. So Andrea, if you would please bring up the slides. All right, everyone. Okay, here we go. All right, so I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So as we've been discussing, data challenges exist in all sectors and they have far-reaching impacts. Governments in the private sector across the world are struggling to deal with the multidimensional nature of data. And we've talked also about kind of the siloed frameworks that exist at times and uncoordinated actions across actors that are bound to be futile in the face of the interdependencies of our global society. And so at Datasphere, we believe that we need a new level of dynamic collaboration in order to address these challenges. And if we go to the next slide. So there are several things that are going on in Africa in particular, right? AI investing, as everybody knows, is growing very quickly across the world, but it's going fastest in Africa and the Middle East. And part of ensuring that AI models foster equitable and inclusive applications is us being able to grapple with some of the problems of data access, sharing, management, and quality that we've been dealing with for a long time, right? Legal frameworks have been leaving gaps in critical safeguards and shortages of data sharing mechanisms while they're trying to emphasize data protection, right? And the AAU data policy framework and the AFCTA will help with some of this, but I think there's needs for more resonant regulatory guidance as well. And implementation is key, right? We still need more innovation and experimentation, not just to develop these agile policy mechanisms, but also to ensure that the approaches that we're taking to data governance are technically sound, pragmatic, and contextually adapted, as we discussed earlier, right? With copy pasting policy frameworks from the EU not being sufficient to address African challenges. So next slide. So what kind of innovative solutions can we test in sandboxes, right? We can deal with things like emerging data intermediaries, such as data fiduciaries, trusts, cooperatives, commons, and stewardship models, right? Through some of the work that we've been doing in our Sandboxes working groups, what we're coming up with is digital public infrastructure as a model for data sharing and governance, and thinking about how we can bring some of that to the use cases that we're dealing with. Privacy enhancing technologies that focus on homomorphic encryption and trusted execution environments, differential privacy methods, et cetera, and also browser solutions for consent management or other data management solutions, such as data lineage services and all sorts of these innovative ideas, but also just, regulatory frameworks that are not quite adapted at the moment to the sector that they're addressing, right? There's all sorts of innovative solutions that can come out of sandboxes, and they don't have to be one size fits all. They don't have to be just regulatory. They don't have to be just technical. They can combine capacities and produce all sorts of things in between. Next slide, please. These are some of the sectors that sandboxes can be applied in: innovation, trade, digital policy, health, mobility, research, science, and development. In Africa, we're focusing on finance, AI, and health as our key sectors. For the Global Sandboxes Forum, we'll be focusing on AI and sustainability, right? So many different sectors and use cases for sandboxes, right? Moving on to the next slide. Benefits of sandboxes, right? So sandboxes can produce benefits for a multitude of actors. They can create a low-risk model for testing challenging ideas for regulators and offer an opportunity to engage with technological developments and build trust among stakeholders. For companies, for startups and SMEs that lack resources to allocate to compliance and need to focus their funds on scaling businesses, sandboxes can help foster certainty and facilitate market entry and fair competition. And for people at large, sandboxes can promote an understanding of the emerging technologies, practices, rules, and norms at play. And so while the use of sandboxes has been spreading in Africa, capacity building, sharing of good practices, and testing are needed to realize the impact of sandboxes beyond the fintech sector, where they're very familiar, and where the vast majority of efforts have occurred. So as many of you know, the Datasphere Initiative authored a report called Sandboxes for Data, and this was authored last year, and you can access it with this QR code. And here we highlight how the cross-border use of sandboxes can help bridge gaps in the data governance landscape, and can also play a key role in supporting multilateral trade agreements, such as the AFCFTA, and how sandbox enabling provisions have been included in other such trade agreements, including the USMCA. And so you can access the report from this QR code. There's also a URL that I will paste now, or that one of my colleagues can. But we can move on. And I want to introduce you all to the engagement tracks of the Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data. So here we are in the Regulatory Roundtable. And the Regulatory Roundtable is a series of mediated dialogues between policymakers, regulators, practitioners, to identify shared cross-border data sharing challenges, to brainstorm solutions, and to consider the role of sandboxes in streamlining the regulatory process. And through later iterations of the Regulatory Roundtable, what we're going to have is simulations that you will be able to participate in too. This is the first one, so this is more introductory, but they will be increasingly interactive as we move towards simulation. The next engagement track of the Africa Forum on Sandboxes for Data is the Datasphere Academy. This is meant to serve as a hub for sandbox and data governance curricula, fostering peer-to-peer learning opportunities to catalyze action across various domains. And so in the Datasphere Academy, we've launched an online course on sandboxes for data that showcases the data governance and sharing challenges that exist on the African continent right now. And so we would love for you all to register for that course and to complete it, because we think it's really great, and we think it's a great way to digest some of the research that we've done in our paper as well. We also have our sectoral working groups, which many of you are a part of, focusing on the sectors of health, finance, sustainability, and AI. And they bring together experts across the sectors to co-develop outputs and strategies related to data problems within their sectors. And then finally, we have the Sandboxes Lab, where we invite technical experts, product builders, and others to simulate sandboxes and to design and iterate on implement proposed data solutions. Next slide, please. So, I mean, these are a few examples of the impact of sandboxes for data, and I don't have to detail these for you all because you know, but many of the things that sandboxes can produce is policy innovation, enhanced collaboration among stakeholders, sustainable development, capacity building, and obviously when you run a sandbox through a process, you'll create something replicable and scalable and understand where the faults are and where you can build on something toward a more scalable, greater iteration. And so to conclude, cross-border regulatory sandboxes can be used to establish and bolster compliant, but agile data governance can solve problems in other linear and traditional methods struggle with. And so where innovation is impeded by uncertainty, there's an opportunity to apply the sandbox model to unlock opportunities. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on now to my colleague, Rob Floyd, to make his presentation on the Africa Center for Economic Transformation and their efforts in the sandbox space. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much, Justin, and thanks to Datasphere for this roundtable discussion. I find it really good, and I think we're all benefiting as we get into this. I realize I contributed a couple of times in the Q&A and didn't introduce myself. My name is Rob Floyd. I'm the Director for Innovation and Digital Policy at the African Center for Economic Transformation, a Pan-African Policy Institute in Accra. Let me share my screen. And can you see the screen? Okay, great. So we had a couple of questions that we wanted to address in this in this part of the discussion, and I'll be relatively quick because I want to make sure that we have time for discussion. I think there's another presentation as well. But some examples of where sandboxes could be applied and our learning so far. So just a bit of contextualization. The African Center for Economic Transformation is a think tank or a policy institute. We have an innovation and digital policy practice that we launched last year, which I am leading, and we focus on three things. One is AI and economic policy making, and I'll come back to that one. Digital infrastructure, which we touched on a little bit in the last session on the need for digital infrastructure, and emerging tech for green industrialization. So on our work on AI and economic policy making, we undertook some consultations and research to understand the potential for AI and economic policymaking. And one may ask why we focus on that. And it is because we realize that while AI is quite relatively mature, I would say, in sectors such as health, education, even agriculture, disaster risk management, and so forth, it is not very mature in policymaking, in fiscal and monetary policymaking. And this is even the case in the US and in Europe. So we wanted to try to ensure that we can advise African policymakers so they are prepared when the time comes that AI and economic policy making will be utilized, AI tools and solutions will be utilized in African economies. The first phase of this work, we focused on consultations with more than 100 individuals. Then we had 2 formal stakeholder consultations, one with the African Union panel on emerging technologies, another on with the Tairisha Center for Digital Governance, with experts in digital and data governance in particular. I should say that I was happy to see on this webinar many of our partners, including GIZ, UNECA, AI Convergence, etc. Phase 1 work ended with a report, which is available on ASSET's website, and in that we identified a number of opportunities and a number of challenges, which I will come to shortly. But we are preparing for a second phase, which is a deeper analysis and some sandbox simulations. This would be a 3-year program focused probably in 3 countries, with the primary clients being ministries of finance or central banks. We want to focus on key policy drivers, and I'll come to that because that's where these sandbox exercises may focus on, and very much of a partnership approach, including with Datasphere, which we're very pleased to have as a partner. To answer the first question of where the sandboxes could be applied, and this is really around different types of activities, if you will, that the ministries of finance or central banks undertake. And the first one of these is on macro forecasting. So just to give you an example, the IMF developed a machine learning framework to nowcast and forecast economic growth in Turkey. And this tool reduced forecasting errors by 30%. Relative to traditional models. So ultimately, what we want out of these AI solutions, AI tools, is better informed and better policy, ultimately, regardless of where that is. But that was a good example of where those tools could be used to actually ensure that the policy is better. A second area would be around monetary modeling. And this allows actors over time to adjust by making mistakes and then adjusting the actions based on the new information that's generated. So this would be around your level of monetary strengthening or monetary weakening across your economy. A third area could be on taxation. So here, for example, Harvard University and Salesforce created an AI economist two-level deep reinforcement learning framework that learns tax policy based on the data that is provided to it. And here one could think about how to ensure that tax rates are more appropriately applied across segments of the economy, different sectors, different types of corporations, individuals, etc. And I know I've spoken to a number of revenue authorities across the continent. There's lots of interest in this because right now, most revenue authorities essentially have kind of a long list of corporations or individuals that they track and try to get them to pay their taxes. Of course, is a very inefficient way to do it, and probably more efficient by ensuring the tax rates are appropriate to begin with. On banking and financial supervision, this is one where we're talking here about regulatory sandboxes, and this is where AI can be used by regulators to identify patterns that humans may not see. So this is particularly looking at corrupt practices and so forth, where very sophisticated, maybe non-state actors in some cases are engaging in the banking financial system, but not according to the rules and are not being identified by humans. Central bank applications, here the big one where AI is being piloted in a few countries is to respond to crises, financial crises. What we've seen in the past 2 or 3 financial crises is that these things need to happen, decisions need to happen very, very quickly. And the current models and the human-centric models simply cannot act in an appropriate time scale, and therefore the financial crisis just continues to deepen before policies are put in place. Subsidies and incentives would be another area where sandboxes could be used to address these policy drivers. So what are the appropriate subsidies or incentives? And here AI could be used to create new data that actually better predicts market and corporate reactions to certain subsidies. And somewhat similar on interest rate setting, one can use AI to ensure that interest rates are more targeted and more responsive to the market. So those would be some of the areas that we see where there could be sandboxes used to inform what the AI and AI solutions and AI tools might be to address those policy questions, those policy drivers. Now, to the second question on what we've learned so far, I have a list of 10 here that are kind of in three groups. Certainly, and I think this was to Rachel's point, we also are very positive about the direction that Africa is going regarding a digital single market, regarding data policy, new AI strategies and frameworks are being put in place, the role that the African Union and out in NAPAD and UNECA are playing in that, I think are very positive developments. But when we look at AI for economic policy making, it's very much a frontier agenda, as I mentioned, even in the West. So we need to be realistic about what we can accomplish in the short term and medium term. And there is an ecosystem to support these AI solutions often does not exist, particularly in ministries of finance and central banks. Often AI policy sits within the Ministry of ICT or Ministry of Innovation if it exists. There was discussion earlier in this session about the silos that are created due to data protection. So one of the things that needs to be addressed and where governments need support is to create that ecosystem to support AI solutions. We also found the consultations, and this was very interesting, and I found the question about political will interesting in the immediate last session. What we found was that technical experts within ministries are very interested. You have your data scientists, you have your programmers, etc. But digital leadership is missing. And I think here, particularly in ministries of finance and central banks, There is an age dimension to that, in the sense that generally the leaders of these organizations are not the youngest people, and may not have the digital skills themselves to fully understand what the opportunities are, and therefore that digital leadership is often missing. Not always, but often. So whether it is political will or a lack of knowledge and understanding, I think is an interesting question. Then if we go to more of the data issues, I mean, usability and access are huge challenges, right? I mean, the government data often is years old, is in horrible formats, is sometimes even questionable. And we don't even know yet what new data may be created and how that can be created, and to ensure that it is inclusive, as was discussed earlier. We argue that more action is needed at the national level on data security, privacy, and ownership. But going back to that question about the tension between national policy versus regional policy, I think is an important one. As was mentioned earlier, digital infrastructure and skills are important, but our analysis showed that they're not yet seen as urgent. That, you know, governments say the right things, but then if you actually look at budget allocations, for example, it's not going to that. On digital infrastructure, there's lots that could be done on the business environment, investment environment, to support investment in digital infrastructure that's not being done. And then bias will be a significant challenge in the context of Africa, whether this is related to language, related to national context, related to the big economies versus small economies, etc. And then lastly, on our learnings, there's no principles for responsible AI in Africa. And I know that work is being done on this, but it will be a challenge as we go down this road of using data, including sometimes personal data, to inform economic policies without good, well-accepted principles for responsible AI. We also need to be very cognizant that AI for good is not a given. You know, and I don't think we should underestimate this, that government actors have, and politicians have lots of different demands upon them, and will use AI for nefarious purposes in some cases, and we need to be very cognizant of that. And lastly is the geopolitical tensions in the technology and digital space. As we, you know, are talking about, for example, national policies, we know that individual governments are struggling. Should they follow a European model, a US model, a Chinese model, or the Indian model? And all of these choices come with costs and benefits, whether that is investment, whether that is political, etc. So just another thing that we need to keep in front of our agenda as we engage in these countries. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much. Let me stop sharing. Back to you, Justin.
Great, thank you, Rob. Wanjiru, please go ahead and make your presentation. And on as Lorraine said, questions and comments about the presentations can be made in the chat, and we will address them after they've been made.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Justin. It's just started raining heavily here. I hope you can hear me. Let me make my presentation. So I'll just start by introduction. My name is Wanjiru. I'm a digital health consultant here in Kenya, but currently I'm moderating the flagship innovation in data sandbox flagship for Africa CDC, where we aim to develop a sandbox that will promote homegrown innovation here in Africa. Let me see if I can present. Sorry. Okay, so I'll just talk through my presentation that I have. I don't know why I'm not able to present. At the Health Sandbox, what we are doing, the aim of the Health Sandbox, the Sandbox for Africa CDC, the main aim of the Sandbox was just to see how can we promote homegrown innovation here in Africa. As we all know, and like everyone else has talked about, regulations and data regulations and health policy, they are so restrictive, especially for startups who want to implement their innovations. And a good example is where if a health startup has implemented an innovation in one country and it's working well, if they want to transfer or scale this innovation to another country, they always find it challenging because the regulations, the health policy in the other African country are totally different. So what was the aim of this flagship? So the main aim was try to see how can we harmonize these policies so that these innovators are able to scale their innovation from one country to another. In terms of data, are we able to exchange data cross-border? Because that's also an issue. So that was the main aim. The main aim was to promote innovation from one country to another. What we have been doing, initially when we started the flagship, we had 3 pillars, which was innovation, data, and policy. So we thought that we should work on these 3 pillars so that we can implement the sandbox. And we have been interacting with health stakeholders across Africa just to trying to understand what are some of the challenges that are affecting the health sector or the innovators. And we have conducted co-creation workshop with health startup owners and also health stakeholders from all over Africa. And the 3 main things that are hindering startup to grow from one country to another. One of it is the regulations, health policies, like I've just mentioned. People don't know in most countries when you start applying for these licenses, you don't know where to start from, or even though you know, you'll start from one office, but you don't. The process is long. You have to move from one office to another, and when you move to the other office, they'll tell you need to go to another office. So them not knowing this process, how it's conducted, it consumes a lot of time, and also it can be discouraging. And remember, this is only one country. The other thing is the regulations, they're so restrictive. We all know the government is trying as much as possible to protect their citizens, and we commend them for that. But also making these policies accommodate innovation in African countries, something that we should push for. So that's something else, like the restrictive regulations and policies. Those are something else that are limiting innovators from scaling their innovation. The other thing is the data, the exchange of data. Exchanging of data from one country to another is also a challenge. We know currently AU came up with the data interoperability guidelines. So those are some of the development, just trying to see, can African country adopt this so that the exchange of data from one country is easy. The third thing that we identified is funding issue. You already have a good idea, you want to implement it, but you don't have funding. So are there policies which are there that will support these innovators for them to know where to access funding, what they should do if they need funding to implement their innovation? So those were some of the 3 issues we identified as the limiting innovation in Africa. So what have we been doing? In this flagship, what we are trying to do as a next step, because these are three main things that we should tackle, that is policy, funding, and data. So what we tried, because if it's in terms of policy, we need to harmonize. We know every government, they have their policies, and changing it might be tricky. So what we thought as a wise thing is, can we start with one of the problem that it's easily, that we can easily implement, and that was the data interoperability. And just like I've said, AU has the standards in place. So can we use this data to develop a framework to see whether the innovation in these African countries can test their innovations to see whether they meet these standards that have been set by AU. If not, what are the recommendations we need to provide to Africa CDC on adjusting this recommendation, or maybe seeing in some countries what are the guidelines that they should adopt. So currently we are working on the data interoperability sandbox, and the next step, we are currently at the step where we are planning to implement it. We have teams that they have already implemented this sandbox, and they have an architecture that we should adopt, because in this project, we are trying not to reinvent the wheel, but to work with whatever has already worked here in Africa. So we already have an infrastructure, we already have an architecture that we plan to implement. So the next step is presenting it to Africa CDC for them to adopt it, or ask us to make changes to it. Then we can visit governments, several governments in Africa, say from the 5 regions, East, West, South, Central, and did I say West Africa? So that, North Africa, sorry, so that we can test with some of the countries and see what are the guidelines in their country? Do they meet the guidelines that have been set by AU? And how should we adjust them to make sure that they are able to scale their innovation, they are able to exchange data, maybe within the country or also with other countries in Africa. So that's where we are at the moment. And in future, what we plan to do is also the plan of harmonizing health policies is still in the pipeline. Although that might involve a lot of government issues, because every country has its own policy. We'll try and work with Africa CDC to see how this government can adopt this process of harmonizing the data, so that we have a policy that will allow innovators to scale their innovation from one country to another. So in terms of areas that the health sandbox can work in Africa, telemedicine is new in Africa, but people are adopting it. So if we have policies around telemedicine, like if we can tailor policies around this, and also policies around data exchange using this application, that's one area that we can look at and see how we can support Africa innovators to improve telemedicine application, the use of telemedicine application here in Africa. The other area is home care services. In Kenya, in Africa, that is not so common, but it's in some countries, home care services have been provided. And for example, in countries like Rwanda, they don't have policies around home care services. So how can we support them as we are supporting other Africa countries? Is this an area that we should look at so that we can have policies that can support organizations that are providing these services? The other area.
Thank you, Wanjira. I just wanted to say we're running close on time, and we're trying to make sure that we end on time and respect everybody's everybody's schedule today. But no, thank you so much for these great examples. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time to have anybody ask any last questions about the presentations. Okay. I guess hearing none, I'll pass it over to Lorraine to close.
Well, thank you so much. And perhaps this is a little bit of a sneak peek of what we're doing in the other task forces. So Andrew, people want to continue having the conversation with you, they can come to our sandbox on health, and the same thing for Rob as well, in terms of the AI sandbox as well. And I hope that you enjoyed the conversation and the exchange. And really our intention was for this to be a space that, although moderated and structured, still had an informality to it, where we felt like we could exchange ideas in these emerging topics. We don't have yet a community of practice for people that are doing and active and exploring the notion of sandboxes around the continent. We hope that this is the first in a way that connects on the different dots. We are doing work that is more sectorial oriented as well into specific issues, but we do want to create this space as a unique space for us to exchange good practices and thoughts as well, and also for this to be a place where we can keep each other updated in terms of what's happening, what are the priorities, the challenges, the different opportunities. There's only so much that we as individuals can know on what's happening in other fora with other topics. But I'm a strong believer that we do need to find these spaces to connect the dots. And that's what we would like to for you to do. We're going to share a Menti as well. If you have another minute before we close, but you can share some of your biggest takeaways as well from the roundtable. Any ideas that you're leaving with, any examples that you think were remarkable, or any comments in terms of improvement as well. We aim to continue to connect you as practitioners and stakeholders to build that strong network to develop and to implement good practices on data challenges and sandboxes in the continent. And also I hope this one is the first of many. So if you have any other ideas, if you want to share your own initiatives as well, we would be happy to host you in the next roundtable. I also have my colleagues share the learning modules that we produced for Sandboxes if you want to learn more about it, and also if you want to become a certified Sandboxes, you're a Sandboxer yourself, feel free to log in and to follow the course. It's totally open and free. And keep an eye on your email for the announcement of the next roundtable. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending our first roundtable. And see you in the next one. And do please, if you had the time, share your thoughts in the question that we just shared. Thank you so much. We're going to hang out for another minute.